DBContext class is at the heart of how our app communicates with the database. It contains all the necessary methods and properties that we need to retrieve, delete, and save data, and it tracks the relationships between classes for us too. As you are quite familiar with by now, we are going to inject this class into our own class. So let's create a class, and I'll call it bookDBContext, and I'll place the class in a folder called Services. So I'm going to create a folder, and I'll call it Services. And in it, I'm going to create a class, and I'll call it bookDBContext. Now, to have access to the DBContext class, we will simply inherit it. So we will inherit DBContext. As you can guess, we need to import the namespace. Now, since we are inheriting from the class, we need a constructor that will pass the inherited class into it. So let's create that. And as an argument, we will pass the DBContext options. So that comes from the DBContext. And the option we want is DBContext itself. So we will do type DBContext, and I'll give it a name. I'll just call it options. But before we can use it, we need to pass the options to the base level. So if you're familiar with the syntax for it, we'll do colon base and pass the options to it. So this is a constructor. This is basic inheritance. Nothing new is going on here. This is simply C#. We inherit from DBContext and then pass that as a DBContext option into our class. We don't need to create any variables and assign the options to it. We simply want it to directly pass it through the constructor. And next, inside the constructor, we will tell Entity Framework what pattern we want to create when the DBContext is created at the runtime. And in our case, we want to be able to use migrations for our database, meaning we want to be able to add, remove, and edit tables through our code, so when we make a change to classes, we can migrate the changes into the database schema. So in the constructor, we'll use the database dot migrate. And you can see that it applies any pending migrations for the context to the database. Next, we need to set up the dbsets properties for our classes. dbset, in a sense, creates the tables from the properties inside the class. I am going to make them virtual so Entity Framework can easily override them. So we're going to create a table for each of our classes. So I'm going to create public virtual, and it's going to be dbset. And the first one will be for the book, and I'll call it books. And it's gonna be a property, so get and set. Now I don't have access to book yet. That's in our models, so I'll have to import the namespace for it. And this is our first dbset for the book. And I'm going to copy that and create the next one for the author, review, reviewer, category, country, and then the intermediary tables for the book author and book category. So all I have to do is really just modify them here. So it's gonna be author, review, reviewer, and I'm just gonna do them. This is really the same thing over and over again. So I have my DB sets. Now I just have to rename them accordingly. So for author, it's going to be authors. For review, it will be reviews, and so forth. So each of our table that we will be creating has the DB set ready. These are all our classes that we created in the models. And the one last thing needed is to set up the many-to-many relationships, and that is done by using the method in model creating. So let's do that next.